Back in the 18th century, there was this small, kind of poor kingdom that managed to build one of the most feared armies in all of Europe. But here's the thing, this wasn't just an army. In a very real way, it was the state. So, let's break down the cold, hard mechanics of the Prussian war machine. This one quote from Frederick the Great, honestly, it tells you everything you need to know. This whole system wasn't built on patriotism or fighting for glory. No, it was about engineering absolute, unquestioning obedience through sheer terror. This philosophy was basically the software running the entire Prussian army. So, to really get how this machine worked, we're going to break it down into 5 key parts. We'll start with the core idea behind it all, then look at how they got the manpower, the tech that gave them a lethal edge, the training that forged the soldiers, and finally, how it all snapped together into one terrifying whole. All right, let's kick things off with the fundamental concept that made Prussia so different and so incredibly formidable. This right here is the absolute key to understanding everything. Think about it. For places like France or Austria, the army was a tool of the state. In Prussia, it was the other way around. The entire state, its government, its economy, its whole social structure was built for one single purpose: to serve the military. The state was an instrument of the army. And to give you an idea of just how extreme this was, get this. By 1740, a staggering 3.6% of the entire Prussian population was serving in the military. In relative terms, that made it the biggest army in Europe. Every single part of their society was designed to keep this massive force fed, armed, and ready. Which brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did they pull this off? How does a kingdom with not a lot of money and not a lot of people field an army that could go toe-to-toe with the giants of the continent? Well, the answer is all about ruthless bureaucratic efficiency. So let's talk about the first ingredient you need for an army: people. Where did the human fuel for this machine come from? The answer lies in a revolutionary and, frankly, chilling system of recruitment. This was the Canton System, introduced back in 1733, and it was a masterpiece of bureaucracy. It basically turned the entire kingdom into a giant, perfectly organized database of future soldiers. It solved the manpower problem, not with random press gangs like other countries, but with cold, calculated administration. And the process was just incredibly meticulous. The whole country was mapped out, household by household. Every single regiment knew exactly which district its future soldiers were coming from. Why? Because every single male child was put on a military list the day he was born. From that moment on, you were essentially state property, earmarked for a life of service. But here's the thing. The system was also ruthlessly pragmatic. This royal edict makes it pretty clear. This wasn't some universal draft. The state was smart enough not to cripple its own economy. So, nobles, the educated, landowners, they were all exempt. The entire burden fell on the poor, the peasants, the farm laborers, basically anyone the state considered economically expendable. Okay, so they've got the men, an endless supply of them. But on the battlefield, you need more than just bodies. You need a technological edge. And for Prussia, that edge came from a surprisingly simple piece of metal. You see, most armies at the time used wooden ramrods to load their muskets. Problem was, these things would snap in the middle of a battle or get swollen and useless in the rain. The Prussians, though, they introduced a simple, durable iron ramrod. It didn't break, it didn't care about the weather, and it let soldiers load their weapons much, much faster. And the results of this simple change were absolutely devastating. A typical soldier in another army could maybe get off 2 shots a minute. A well-drilled Prussian soldier, he could fire 5. This wasn't about bravery or skill, this was just math. And the Prussian army could deliver more than double the firepower, literally mowing down enemy soldiers before they could even get close. So now you've got the men, and you've got the technology. The final piece of the puzzle is the soldier himself. You have to program him, install the right operating system to ensure he functions exactly as intended. The Prussian drill was legendary, and for good reason. It was brutal. This wasn't about learning to march in a parade. This was a psychological process. Through endless, mind-numbing, repetitive drilling, the famous goose step, the army systematically destroyed a recruit's sense of self. The goal was to create a human machine, an automaton that would react to orders without thinking, without hesitating, and, most importantly, without feeling fear. And that brings us right back to this foundational idea. The entire training system was built on a grim calculation. The fear you had for your officer, for the punishment he could inflict, had to be greater than your fear of dying in battle. That's what kept those Prussian lines perfectly straight and unbroken in a storm of cannon fire. So, how did all these pieces, the manpower system, the superior technology, the psychological conditioning, how did it all come together? Well, they weren't just separate parts working in parallel. They were flawlessly integrated into a single, terrifying system. The real genius of the Prussian model, as historians like Dennis Schulter point out, was its total integration. It was a perfect, deadly loop. The Canton System fed the men into the ranks, the iron ramrod gave them superior firepower, and the brutal drill conditioned them to use that firepower with terrifying precision. Each part made the others more effective. And I mean, just look at the scope of it. The state bureaucracies was basically a war finance office. The entire economy was organized to supply the army. The nobility, the junkers, what was their job? To serve as the mandatory officer corps. And the peasantry? They were just the raw material, cataloged and ready for consumption. Every single level of society had one primary function: to feed the machine. In the end, what Prussia created was, for its time, a nearly perfect military machine. It was efficient, it was lethal, and it turned Prussia into a major European power. But it leaves you with a pretty stark question, doesn't it? When you engineer an entire state for the sole purpose of war, what is the ultimate price you pay for that perfect, brutal efficiency?